So,
Okay.
marry, fuck, kill.
Oh no.
Colonel Brandon, Willoughby, Edward Ferrars.
I would kill Willoughby, no doubt. I think I'd sleep with Edward Ferrars, and I would marry Colonel Brandon.
So delicate. No. Here's the right answer. Kill Ferris. He's kind of boring.
No.
Sorry.
No,
Yeah.
he's shy and he's sweet and he's cute. I will protect him.
Fuck Willoughby because he'd be good in bed. You know he would. He's dashing. He'd be good in bed.
He'll break your heart.
Well, that's why I married Colonel Brandon, who would never hurt.
So we at least agree we marry Colonel Brandon.
Obviously.
Welcome to This Is Lit, a podcast where we drink and talk about our favorite books. I'm Elizabeth.
And I'm Casey.
So raise a glass and let's get started.
Okay, Liz, what are you drinking today?
Well, let me pull the bottle out. We are drinking the Marca Prosecco from Italy. So it is a sparkling wine. Nice, dry, crisp taste, but still a little bit of sweetness because it is Prosecco.
And I'm a baby.
Well, you're not a baby.
I just like sweet things. I like this. It's not as sweet as I do like, but it's very refreshing, so.
Yeah, there's a little bit of honeycomb at the end.
It's basically champagne.
It is basically champagne.
We were talking about this earlier. Champagne has basically become Kleenex. It means all sparkling wine, even though technically champagne only comes from the Champagne region. Isn't that the same with cava, though? Like Spanish wine?
Yeah.
Isn't cava a region
Same
of
thing
Spain?
with cava. It's true with a lot of different kinds of wine, where it's like you can only call it if it comes like Bordeaux.
or
Bordeaux
like a certain-
can only come from the Bordeaux
Or
region.
France. Or if it's got like a certain percentage of that type of grape in it.
Yeah.
For some of them.
Well, Bordeaux there are 5 different grape varietals that you have to have 2 of the 5 in order to call it a Bordeaux blend.
Wine people are so snobby. I'm glad that I'm a cheap wine person.
Yeah. And this is really good. I like it.
So anyway,
Yes.
today we are discussing Sense and Sensibility.
Jane Austen.
Classic Jane
I
Austen.
love Jane Austen.
Not my favorite Jane Austen, but definitely up there.
Not my favorite Jane Austen.
What's your favorite Jane Austen?
What do you think my favorite Jane Austen
Pride and
is?
Prejudice?
Yes, I'm a basic bitch, Casey.
My favorite Jane Austen is Emma.
I can see that.
I love Emma. A nosy busybody who's too smart for her own good and she gets into everybody else's business.
Mm-hmm. And she is in the unusual position to inherit her father's estate.
Yes.
But we're
Love
not
it.
talking about Emma. We're
We're
talking
talking
about
about Sense and Sensibility, which I do
Eleanor
love.
and Marianne Dashwood.
The Dashwood sisters.
The Dashwood sisters.
It should be a sitcom.
I know, right?
One super uptight, one doesn't know how to fucking take a chill pill. Probably couldn't get fucking
Well,
in
the
here.
title Sense and Sensibility is kind of Jane Austen
Referencing them.
poking at the sense of like having good sense in English society, and one of them being having nothing but sensibilities, where she's ruled by her emotions.
You know, the first time I read this book, I was young enough that I still had, you know when you're younger and like your grasp of the language is if it sounds like another word, it probably means close to the same thing as the other word.
Mm-hmm.
So I always thought, so when I was young, and I'm talking like 11 or 12, like I thought sensibility was, more like sense, like like your logic or your reason. And so I was like, why is she just like sense and sense? Like I didn't understand it.
Sense.
So this book is actually the book that taught me through context clues what the word sensibility meant.
Yeah.
So
I actually read the book, I think it was around my freshman year of college.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, it took me a long time to get to Jane Austen, but...
was it your first Jane Austen? Or was Pride and Prejudice?
Sense and Sensibility was my first Jane Austen book.
So you didn't read Jane Austen at all until college?
No,
That
I didn't
surprises
read
me.
Jane Austen until college, and then I read all of it.
Right away. Yeah, my first Jane Austen was Pride and Prejudice, as most people did. Well, that's not true. My first association with Jane Austen was actually the Emma movie that came out in the 90s with Paltrow and Alan Cumming.
Yes.
And Jeremy, what's his
Oh
face?
my gosh, Alan Cumming.
Yeah,
man.
he was the priest.
The priest, yeah.
But that was my first association. But the first time I read,
I feel like most people's first association with Emma is Clueless.
I probably saw Emma before I saw Clueless. Emma in my family's house. My dad is actually the one who introduced us all to it. My dad. Anything else I have to say about my dad? My dad loves rom-coms. He embraces rom-coms, and he teaches all of his sons to love rom-coms.
Well,
and that it's not just a girly thing, which I appreciate.
Yeah. Well, my mom loved the Pride and Prejudice movie, and so
I just want to call her Elizabeth from Pirates of the Caribbean. Keira Knightley.
No, that was Pride and Prejudice. My mom loved the Sense and Sensibility movie. I'm sorry, I said the wrong thing.
So Sense and Sensibility with Kate Winslet.
Yes, Kate Winslet and what's his face? Hugh Grant and Alan Rickman. Alan Rickman.
Oh man.
Oh, I know, right?
I don't think I've ever seen another I've seen with Pride and Prejudice. I've seen the 2005 movie with Keira Knightley, and I've seen, of course, the original Colin Firth miniseries.
I love that. Whenever I'm sad, I watch that.
It's good, but it's such a commitment. It's so long. I like the Keira Knightley one, even though it's not as honestly a book, but it's less of a commitment.
When I was sick, my mom put me in her bed with her, and then we watched Pride and Prejudice, and I remember at the end when he comes out of the fog at the dawn, and we're just holding on to each other, and we're like, oh my gosh, this is so sweet,
so romantic. Yeah, no, but Sense and Sensibility, I think the only movie variation or film variation I've seen is the Alan Rickman one.
Yes,
and that's Kate Winslet.
Yes,
Emma Thompson.
Yes,
are the sisters.
They're Marianne and Eleanor. And I don't know who plays Margaret, the little one. But that movie has one of my favorite quotes that I was sorely disappointed was not in the book, where Margaret tells Edward Ferrars, she's like, piracy is the only option.
Yes. I remember that.
I have a T-shirt that says
I think I had that on my AOL Messenger away line at some point or something. But yeah, Jane Austen is very unique because there were definitely female writers at the time.
That is true.
But there were none that were quite so, Emily Dickinson was very independent as well, but she was a poet more than a novelist. Yes. And Mary Shelley had her own crazy thing going. But,
no one will ever be as gothic as Mary Shelley.
Oh, I love it.
She's epitome of goth.
But Jane Austen was poor.
Yes.
And actually, I think her poverty benefited her in the sense that she managed to maintain independence. I think if she had been wealthy in that time, she would have gotten married off to some dude for some familial whatever, and she wouldn't have had the amount of freedom that she had in her situation. So ironically, her poverty is kind of what I think gave her the ability. And I think it's also what gave her the insight that she got that made her so good at parsing the social mores of the time.
I agree. But we start off with Marianne and Eleanor Dashwood they kind of establish that it's they live in this wonderful little house in London.
Cute little house.
And then their father dies. And since the estates can only pass to a son, it passes to their father's oldest son, who is their stepbrother from their father's first marriage. Right. Since the second marriage had nothing to do with the actual Dashwoods, they are legally promised nothing.
Right. So they moved to a cottage.
Yes.
In
Devonshire,
in Norland Park.
Yes. And so no, I thought Norland Park was their estate. Is it?
That's where they grew up. They move away from Norland Park.
Yes, they move away from Norland Park to Barton Cottage in Devonshire. And the Mr. Dashwood makes his son John promise to help out his sisters upon his death, and his evil little piece of shit wife Fanny.
Fanny is the worst.
Is Fanny even short for something, or is her name just Fanny?
I think her name is just Fanny.
Well, it works out because she's kind of an ass.
In British slang, Fanny does not mean ass.
Well, we're in America.
In British slang, Fanny refers to a different part of the female anatomy, which could be another argument for what Fanny dash was.
I did not know that.
You didn't know?
Well played, Jane Austen. Well played.
Yes.
She is not a nice woman. But they have this whole scene where he's like, I mean to help them by giving them this much money every year. And she's like, oh, well, this stipend and if there's money to be had, the mother will live for another 20 years. And I'm like, she is such a selfish woman. With all the airs and graces of being kind. It's ridiculous.
So, and it's interesting because she's terrible. But we're seeing this recurring theme in Jane Austen's work because she is absolutely horrible. But without her character, we would never meet Edward Ferrars, her brother.
And Edward Ferrars.
It's the same thing that happens in Pride and Prejudice.
Yes.
Caroline Bingley is the worst.
Caroline Bingley is awful.
But without her, we wouldn't meet Mr. Bingley.
Did you ever see? There was this old Netflix movie. It was a British thing where this girl got transported into the world of Pride and Prejudice and had to take on the role.
Yes. What is it called? It's called
something. It's not Becoming Jane.
No.
That has Anne Hathaway in it. But it's this really old one. And so I remember there being
Adventures in Austen or
something like that.
Yeah, it's long. It's like long. It's like a movie, but it's like 3.5 hours long.
But I watched it, of course, because I'm grateful.
Naturally.
So. But, in there, Caroline Bingley admits to batting for the other team. And I'm like, oh my gosh, 32 academics just punched the air.
I love it.
So, I don't know if that is kind of Fanny's situation, because of some of the situations that arise later in the book.
Well, there's an interesting case to be made for lesbians within Jane Austen's work. I've actually done some research on this. Because much like another famous bachelorette of literature, Emily Dickinson.
Yes.
Jane Austen never married.
No, never.
And there are letters between her and other women that seem to be of a romantic nature. And there's some suggestion, of course, it's just like anything else, you never really can know, that Jane Austen may have been a lesbian. And so then you have characters like Caroline Bingley who exhibit certain behaviors, and you kind of wonder if it's not
or
a mocking. And the interesting thing about that, Jane Austen has always been very self-aware, and so to make her to reflect herself or her own identity within the quote-unquote villainous characters is an interesting technique. She's kind of mocking herself as well. So.
Yeah. So while.
At any rate.
Yes, back to Eleanor and Marianne.
Eleanor
the book is actually
and
about.
Marianne meet Edward because of John's
of
wife.
Yes.
And Edward and Eleanor
Ferrars
get really close really fast.
Is actually the brother of Fanny, which, another fun random fact. I'm full of useless random facts. Edward Cullen actually gets his name from Edward Ferrars.
I did not know that.
When I was small and dumb, I really Stephanie Meyer had a website that's this is, and she would answer questions, and everyone's like, where did you get the name Edward? And he is named after Edward Ferrars from Sense and Sensibility. So now Edward
there are a lot of I sometimes think we should do Twilight on here because there are a lot of interesting things that happen in Twilight.
Probably do Twilight.
And looking at, Twilight has been this series for me, and it's where I really enjoyed them, and I recommended them all to my friends, and then they started coming out with more books and the movies, and it became something to mock.
Yeah.
But there are some really interesting choices made within the Twilight novels, and there is reflection of a lot of Gothic literature and a lot of romantic literature of the Jane Austen era.
Excellent for the age group it is written for.
Yeah. So
once you are out of that age group, it's true.
But anyway, it does take a lot of cues from Jane Austen's work.
It does. It really does.
As Gothic literature. And so Edward Ferrars, I didn't know that.
And Edward Ferrars he's exceptionally shy. Mm-hmm. He's a shy young man, and he has difficulty being all, Marianne mocks him for not being. She's like, well, if you're really passionate about my sister, why don't you show that level of passion? And keeping in mind that Marianne is all of 17, that makes sense for her character to be like, she wants that kind of passionate romance.
Torrid romance.
She wants passion and liveliness and.
Well, and she doesn't want. I also think it's motivated from an area of protecting her sister. She doesn't want her sister to be with a man that doesn't.
Yes.
Is not going to continue to love her years down the line. And
yes.
Only like. But the thing is, Edward is very shy, and so even though he and Eleanor develop a close attachment, Fanny butts her stupid nose in once again and tells Mrs. Dashwood that she thinks that Eleanor only wants to marry Edward because of his money.
Yes, and she really thinks Edward's regard for Eleanor is not what it is, and even
He's just
Eleanor
too shy to turn her down.
And Eleanor will not even admit her full regard for Edward Ferrars
because
she
Eleanor
doesn't want to
that she
set herself up for heartbreak.
Eleanor has a very low opinion of herself, and so
she does.
So when someone else presents the idea that Edward maybe doesn't care for her, she's like, well, yeah, that makes sense. Instead of being like, he obviously does and fighting for it, she's like, well, it makes sense that he wouldn't like me. And I'm just like, Eleanor!
That is something that I enjoyed with the movie more than I did with the book, because in the movie they show Eleanor and Edward bonding with Margaret, who is the youngest of the Dashwood sisters, who is at the time 13. They made her younger in the movie, but they're in the movie. They have this whole thing where it's like Edward is trying to tell Eleanor something and Fanny keeps preventing him, and so I liked that in the movie. But unfortunately, they do have to move to Devonshire, which takes Eleanor away from Edward.
Yes.
And Fanny does everything she can to keep Edward away from Eleanor. But when they are in Devonshire, Marianne decides to go for a walk, is running down a hill in the rain, trying to get back to the cottage, and slips and falls and turns her ankle. And she is rescued by a dashing young man named Mr. Willoughby.
Mr. Willoughby in his red coat with tails and his curly chestnut hair. Okay.
Hey, curly chestnut hair is attractive.
I'm not saying it isn't. I thought Willoughby
that's a thing for me.
I mean, Willoughby comes out of the woods looking for all the world like this dashing romantic hero that you read about in the tales, like Prince Charming.
Yes, so of course Marianne is taken with him instantly. And we're meant
as readers to be taken with him as well. Like,
exactly.
I mean, the thing is that since this is a reread for both of us, we're both like, Willoughby. But the thing is, when I first read it, I was like, oh, how romantic. He saved her. He carried her home.
He carried her back home with her. And it's such a romantic gesture, a romantic moment. And then Marianne falls head over heels almost instantly with Willoughby. And her mother encourages it because she wants her daughters happy.
And because, frankly, her mother
has a little bit more of the sensibility to her as well.
Well, I think Mrs. Dashwood is a widow who not only lost her husband, but lost the home that she was comfortable in all quite at once. And so there's a little bit of an element of living vicariously through her children.
Yeah, and I believe there is a line, too, where it's like Mrs. Dashwood thinks in the spring they're going to add on to the cottage. And it's like it's nothing more than £500 to be saved by a woman who had never saved in her life. And I'm like, me.
Like, Mrs. Dashwood is more well-meaning than, say, Mrs. Bennett.
Oh,
Pride
yes.
and Prejudice.
Mrs. Bennett Lydia takes after Mrs. Bennett.
But there's a certain amount of frivolity to Mrs. Dashwood and a certain desire to come up with extravagant things to do to keep her distracted from the fact that she's lost her husband and she's lost her home. And I think that's where Sir Middleton comes in.
Yes.
He is a cousin.
Well, aptly named as well.
A cousin.
He is literally the middleman.
And he is a very charming, cheerful man. And he has his mother-in-law and his wife. And then, of course, Mrs. Jennings. These are all the people that are their neighbors. And, but Sir Middleton, he is friends with an older man, a colonel by the name of Brandon.
Colonel Brandon.
So Colonel Brandon becomes, by association, a family friend.
Colonel Brandon.
Oh, here's a good one. Marry, fuck, kill. Colonel Brandon, Fitzwilliam Darcy.
Oh! Why are you
Mr.
making
Knightley.
me choose? Why are you...
Mr. Knightley.
Oh.
For those of you who are not Jane Austen aficionados, those are the romantic heroes from Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, and Emma in that order.
I'm gonna have to marry Darcy because my name's Elizabeth.
That's fair.
Darlingest, loveliest Elizabeth. Okay, so I'm marrying Darcy. I feel like Colonel Brandon, since he's been kind of harboring feelings for so long, might be a little bit of a freak. So
You're saying he's passionate.
Yes, he might be quite passionate. So he would probably be the one that I would have a one-night stand with. And then I guess that leaves me to kill Knightley, which is kind of awful because I love Knightley. He's so kind.
Mine would have to be marry Knightley because there's a certain element
of
Fitzwilliam
Darcy.
The thing about Knightley is you have to understand, the first time I ever saw Emma, the movie, Jeremy Northam plays Mr. Knightley.
He is
And
pretty.
I think there have been a lot of other Mr. Knightleys. I know Johnny Lee Miller, who is on Elementary, played him fairly recently in like a BBC miniseries, which I haven't seen. But Jeremy Northam has, you know that look that the romantic male lead gives the romantic female lead when she's not looking at him.
It's the quote-unquote Disney look. It's the look that all the Disney princes give the princess when she's not looking.
He is a master class at that. And the way he looks at her, I remember they're shooting archery together, and he's trash-talking her and telling her that she puts her nose in everybody's business too much, which is true. But at the same time, he is just watching her shoot these arrows just with absolute adoration in his eyes. I've never gotten over that.
You want to know something really, really cute?
What?
We have photos at my wedding with Paul doing the Disney Prince look.
Gross.
And I'm not paying attention. We hit 5 years this week.
Gross.
5 years, Casey. 5 years.
So anyway, I would have to say just because he was such an early... I think I saw Emma before I saw any others. I think it was Emma, Sense and Sensibility, and then Pride and Prejudice that I saw in that order. And so I'd have to marry Knightley. He's fine. I'd have to marry Knightley, and you know, you asked me 5 years ago, I would have slept with Colonel Brandon and killed Darcy, but I'm gonna have to reverse that now, just because Darcy is an argumentative bastard, and I just feel like
you would give Darcy a run for his money.
Exactly. But that's a hard one. And it totally got us off track, as per usual.
Yeah, as per usual.
So anyway, Marianne meets Sir Middleton and his friend Colonel Brandon before she meets Willoughby.
Yes.
And Colonel Brandon is smitten with her pretty quickly, but Marianne is like,
he's too old.
Old. He's 35.
Oh my God.
At this point in my life, I'm like, 35 is not that old.
No, not that
old.
You
little brat. But
she's a
17.
teenager.
She's 17.
When I was 17, I thought I would be dead by
35
35.
is ancient. But she's like, he's 35, he's fought in a war, he's incapable of falling in love or making anyone else fall in love. And
Which is not true.
I think she says this, and he actually overhears it, doesn't he?
Yeah, but Colonel Brandon has proven time and time again in the novel that he has the greatest capacity for love.
Oh, absolutely. Because he's smitten with Marianne from the very beginning, and
he knows she doesn't return his feelings,
and so
he leaves it alone.
He doesn't bother her about
it, which is so noble.
Even as the Middletons tease him relentlessly about it, and Marianne teases him about it, and like he hears Marianne say that he's incapable of loving someone, which is a really harsh thing to say about someone, and so he's just very quietly and stoically taking this because he's not going to try and make someone who doesn't love him, which especially
is so sweet
from a
guy Colonel Brandon.
Well, from a female perspective, the idea of a male character, because I'm about to get into some feminist theory here. Are you guys ready?
Do it.
So here's the thing. You know, obviously there's this whole situation with, I hate to bring it up in the middle of a lighthearted chit chat, but like there's a whole situation in the world now with rape culture.
Yes.
And the concept of no means no. And while I don't blame romantic comedies or romantic novels for that, in romantic novels, it is considered romantic if a woman shuns a man and he keeps pursuing her because he's not willing to give up on his love.
Okay,
That's considered
this
romantic.
is also pointed out in Pride and Prejudice. So this is something that has happened a long time. When Mr. Collins is rejected by
no for an
Elizabeth, and he's like, I know women of a delicate nature often say no to a man even when she intends to accept him, just for the indication of like making him want her more. And she's like, I'm not doing that. I am telling you no because you're a creeper.
The quote unquote playing hard to get thing. And Jane Austen has time and again, called this out, like you said in Pride and Prejudice. Elizabeth called it out with Mr. Collins. But in Sense and Sensibility, it's unique because instead of a woman calling a man out for doing it, we see a man actively choose not to do it.
Yes.
Instead of pursuing a girl who has said that she is not interested, Colonel Brandon just steps back.
He does, but he still
takes
care of her family because he loves Marianne.
He takes care of her family. He comes and visits. He is very kind to her. He never makes her feel guilty for not having feelings
and he never expects anything more.
Like, that is and I think that's why Colonel Brandon is up there so high in terms of, like, romantic heroes for me, because he's the ultimate female fantasy. He's a man who accepts when a woman doesn't love him, and then when she does, if she does.
Yeah.
I mean, if she had never, I think he still would have had a close friendship with the family and taken care of them, and it would have been fine, and there would have been no bitterness. But the fact when she did, he was willing to give it a chance and not be like, well, you didn't love me before. You know?
Exactly. He's
a man who waits for a woman to tell him what she wants before he does anything.
Exactly.
That's the ultimate female fantasy.
That is so wonderful. So if we have any gentlemen listening to us, Colonel Brandon.
Be like Colonel Brandon.
Be like Colonel Brandon.
At any rate, we got off track. So after she meets Colonel Brandon, after she essentially shuns him, Willoughby comes into the picture.
Willoughby.
And he likes poetry, he likes music, he's dashing, he's got a red coat.
They are similar on everything.
I know I've said this like 3 times.
The red coat?
The red coat with tails, the big brown eyes, and chestnut
Another
curls.
random fact. Back in this time period where this book is set, you know how, like, everyone's like, pink is for girls, blue is for boys? Back then, pink was the more masculine color because gentlemen wore red coats in the English army. And so, like, if they had been, like, abroad or to a war, their coats were sun-faded and they became pink. So pink was a masculine color back then. And blue was for girls. And then it switched sometime in, like, I think it was, like, the 1930s. Something like that. So, another random useless history fact from my husband. The more you know.
So, Willoughby and Marianne begin to carry on in a manner that is not considered appropriate for the time period.
Yes.
Like
everyone
nowadays,
assumes they're secretly engaged.
Because they are so close. And he does several
things. They held hands.
Yes, so nowadays you can live with someone you're not married to and it's not much of a social
it's not
stigma.
a big deal.
But back then, holding hands or taking her to show her the estate that he
alone, with no
chaperone, and having a lock of her hair without being engaged to her.
Yes.
And Eleanor is very frustrated with this behavior. She feels like her sister is not guarding her emotions.
Exactly.
She feels like she's going to get hurt, and she feels like Willoughby is not who he says he is.
Eleanor is coming from a place where she's trying to protect her sister. And
of course, Marianne doesn't see it that way.
No, of course not. But at the same time that they meet Willoughby and things are going so well with Willoughby, Eleanor meets the Steeles. Lucy Steele. Lucy freaking Steele. And her sister.
Yes.
What's her first name? You can't remember her sister's name.
I can't either. Anne.
Anne.
Yes.
Anne Steele. Lucy and Anne Steele.
They're Mrs. Jennings' cousins.
Yes, Mrs. Jennings' cousins. And so Lucy Steele confides to Eleanor that she has been secretly engaged to Edward Ferrars
for 4 years.
For she is the daughter of the master of the school that Edward went to. And that's how they met, and they had a young fling, and they have been secretly engaged for 4 years. So Eleanor is now realizing that her hope of love is dashed completely. So she's having to listen to this silly girl talk about how much she loves Edward and how much Edward loves her, and everything else is just, like, destroying Eleanor.
So Eleanor is miserable and keeping it to herself while Marianne prances around with Willoughby. And then...
Which is one of my favorite quotes from the book. It's like, I will be calm, I am mistress of myself.
Yes.
And that tells you something, because like when Eleanor has her heart broken, she takes some time, she calms herself down, and then she carries on as if nothing had happened.
However, Marianne seems like she is very close to becoming engaged to Mr. Willoughby.
If she's not engaged already. Everyone assumes they're already secretly engaged.
And as she is expecting this engagement to happen, he is suddenly called back to London on business indefinitely.
And this is after that they're going to have a party at the lake, and they're going to go with Colonel Brandon, and Colonel Brandon is called back to London on immediate business. And Mrs. Jennings, gossip she is, talks about Colonel Brandon's secret love child.
Yes.
In London.
And then Mr. Willoughby also hurries away to London without much of an explanation.
This is all at the same time. Yes.
Right when Marianne was expecting him to propose. And so she is distraught. She goes into a depressive episode that lasts for weeks.
And then Mrs. Jennings decides that, I'm going to help these girls out. Why don't you come with me to my house in London? Which is where Edward Ferrars is, which is where Willoughby is.
Which Marianne gets to London
is.
And immediately
writes Willoughby
several very personal, very intimate letters that she has no business sending to a man she's not engaged to.
No.
I mean, in the context of this book, understand I, as a human being, do not feel like anyone is obligated to withhold their feelings from someone because they're not engaged.
No, exactly.
But within the context of society and the time.
Yes.
That was not cool.
No. Well, Willoughby acted in a deplorable manner as well.
And he doesn't answer her letters.
No, none whatsoever.
And
he ghosts her.
He ghosts her completely, and then the worst thing that can ever happen to you after you've been ghosted by an ex happens to Marianne. She runs into him by complete chance in public.
At a party. And calls out his name in front of other people, which is very bad. And
he is super reserved and cold to her.
Incredibly. He acts like she's not even there.
He barely acknowledges her.
And, yes, also while they're in London, they meet Robert Ferrars, Edward's younger brother. Mm-hmm. And I have a wonderful quote that I love from Eleanor. Let me find it real quick. But he is definitely a politician, and he likes the sound of his own voice. And so he talks to Eleanor about this whole thing, and Eleanor, extensively. And the quote is, Eleanor agreed to it all, for she did not think he deserved the compliment of rational opposition.
It makes me think of the guys at bars who
exactly.
They're like, I'm just playing the devil's advocate. I don't actually believe this, but what if? And you're like, okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. Yeah,
or
sure.
like you're at a bar and you say something that's like, well, my husband or my boyfriend, and they're like, oh, well, yeah. And you're like,
Yeah. No, he's the kind of guy that there's no point in arguing with him because he's not worth your time.
Exactly.
And Eleanor is wise enough to realize this.
Yes.
Now, back to Marianne.
Yes, back to Marianne. Poor Marianne.
She leaves the party, and she's completely distraught. Shortly thereafter, she receives a letter, not even a letter from Willoughby.
A note from Willoughby.
A brief note with the lock of her hair and other
and the other letters she'd sent him.
Just sent back to her.
And it basically details that
he's engaged to Miss Gray.
He is engaged to, Miss Gray.
She
who
has
$10,000 a year. Miss Gray.
So that's when Marianne tells Eleanor she was never engaged to Willoughby.
Never engaged to Willoughby.
And that her behavior was because she thought for sure eventually he would make an honest woman of her.
Yes, she thought for sure he was going to propose before he went off to London. And he did not.
So when Willoughby's engagement is made public, that's when Colonel Brandon shows up to visit the sisters.
Yes,
and he tells Eleanor that Willoughby is a scoundrel.
He is.
He seduced another woman, Williams.
Colonel Brandon had a girl in his childhood that he was madly in love with.
Yes.
And due to unfortunate circumstances, she was not able to marry him and married someone else who left her destitute and pregnant out of wedlock. And so she had a daughter and Mr. Willoughby.
Eliza,
yes. And Mr. Willoughby
seduced her
and left her pregnant. Out of wedlock. Refused to marry her, and that is why he was called back to London. Was Colonel Brandon had been looking for this girl to try and help her and to save her. And first news of her was that week where he was called away to take care of her and this child. And you find out Willoughby is the one who impregnated her and left her destitute. Willoughby gets all of his money from his rich aunt, I believe.
Who disinherits him when he makes
Eliza
pregnant.
Disinherited him, when he made Eliza pregnant. And she's
that's why
I will not disinherit you if you marry Eliza. And he said no, but
then he finds Miss Grey and her £10,000.
He finds Miss Grey and her £10,000.
Marries for money rather than love or obligation.
Yes, and you also find out that if his aunt had not found out about Eliza, he was going to propose to Marianne the next day.
Now, Brandon tells Eleanor.
Yes,
not Marianne. He tells Eleanor because his motivation is not to be like, see how much better I am than Willoughby.
No.
It is that he hopes Eleanor will deliver this information to Marianne to console her.
Yes.
That she's basically dodged a bullet.
Yes, and he tells Eleanor in the hopes, he's like, you know your sister better than I do. This is the information I have. If you think it is wise to pass that on. If you think
it will help her to grieve.
Yes, he's like, if you think it will help her, please pass it on. If you don't think it will help her, please don't tell her. Yeah, and so Colonel Brandon remains
a true hero.
The best man ever.
The best.
Yes, and then at this time, the Steeles arrive in London, Anne and Lucy. And Lucy is desperate to find Edward.
And
see Edward.
No,
she
before
loves
that,
Edward.
but before that, Lucy and Anne get invited to stay with John and Fanny Dashwood.
Yes, because Fanny absolutely adores Lucy.
It's not so much that Fanny adores Lucy.
It's that she hates Eleanor more.
She hates Eleanor. So Lucy is like, oh, it's been such an honor to be invited to stay with Dashwood, when really what it is Fanny looking for an opportunity to slight Eleanor.
Yes.
By not inviting her.
Because her own brother will not invite them to their house when they're in London.
So basically Fanny uses Lucy as a way to insult Eleanor. And Lucy is too stupid to realize that, and instead takes it as a compliment.
Yes.
Because she's a fool.
And Anne is even stupider, because the only two people who know about Lucy's engagement to Edward are her sister Anne and Eleanor. And Anne spills the beans to Edward's sister.
And Fanny responds just as badly as she did to Eleanor.
Yes, Fanny has the hysterics, quote unquote.
Fanny has always got the hysterics.
Yeah, well.
And the Mrs. Steeles are turned out of the house.
Yes.
Which is embarrassing.
Mm-hmm.
Edward's mother orders him to break off the engagement.
Yes, and he refuses because he's a man of honor.
He's honorable.
He's like, I've made a promise to Lucy. I'm going to keep it.
Yes.
Even though Eleanor is fairly certain he harbors no affection for Lucy.
Now, this is where it gets interesting, in my opinion, because basically, Edward, at this point, has condemned himself to a loveless marriage, being
disinherited by his mother
because of honor,
while
he still loves another woman.
It's very Zuko of him.
It's very, very much. And Colonel Brandon sees this and he says, I can't do much for you, but there's this parish.
There's this living parish at my estate that I hear is going to be vacant soon. And he tells Eleanor that it's going to be vacant very soon, and he offers it to Edward. And he wants Eleanor to offer it to Edward because he has never met Edward, but he knows Edward is a good man based on how Eleanor holds him in his esteem.
Yes.
And at this point, Mrs. Jenkins thinks Colonel Brandon has proposed to Eleanor, which is the dumbest thing.
Well, Mrs. Jenkins is a fool.
She is a fool.
She's a gossip. So, Colonel Brandon gives this opportunity. And here's the interesting thing. Basically, the entire novel, Eleanor is secretly in agony and basically putting it on the back burner to deal with everybody else's personal disasters.
She is.
And the only and it's interesting to me.
Is she a Virgo? She's a Virgo.
the interesting thing to me is that the only person who seems to notice this is
not Colonel Brandon.
It's not Edward. It's Colonel Brandon, who is essentially doing the same thing. He's putting his own personal unrequited love on the back burner in order to help the girl he's in love with, and her sister, and Eliza.
You recognize in kind.
And so there's a certain kinship between Colonel Brandon and Eleanor. So,
he truly does care for her like a sister.
Yes.
And then they finally, the girls, Eleanor and Marianne, after this living is offered, decide they can finally leave London.
They leave London.
And they go to
Miss
Palmer's house.
Mrs. Palmer's.
Who is the daughter of Mrs. Jenkins.
Mrs. Jennings,
I'm sorry.
Charlotte Palmer.
Charlotte Palmer. And in the movie, the husband of Charlotte Palmer is played by the guy who was House.
Oh, right. Hugh Laurie,
yeah. And so I really like his character.
He's funny. He's very
like his character.
Snarky.
He's like,
he doesn't say much, but when he does, it is just
it's a zinger.
Yeah.
And he is. I think he's in the book for 5 minutes, but like every time he came in, I snickered.
So then
they have a newborn son.
They have a newborn son. So the girls are staying with them, and Marianne, continuing to be dramatic AF, goes for a mournful walk in the rain and becomes very ill.
Yes, very ill.
And they think she's going to die.
They really do. She has a fever. And that is what people died of. And they thought she was, thought she was going to die.
Eleanor writes to Mrs. Dashwood and says, your second daughter is on death's door. You need to come. And Mrs. Dashwood's like, I have no way of getting
I have no way. And Colonel Brandon, wonderful man he is,
strides out of the fog.
Strides out of the fog and is like, I will go fetch her mother. And I will go retrieve her. Which is super, and like in the movie, Colonel Brandon is like, is there anything I can do? And Eleanor says she would be better if my mother was here. And he leaves immediately.
Yes.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, Blonde Professor Snape, you are wonderful.
So when Colonel Brandon leaves to go and get Mrs. Dashwood, that's when Willoughby arrives.
Yes, and Eleanor, the only reason Eleanor thought anyone was coming, was because she thought it was Colonel Brandon's carriage.
She was expecting her mother.
And it was Willoughby.
And it was Willoughby.
On the next hill.
Willoughby shows up in disarray. Yes. I imagine his auburn locks just damp and flying, his coat askew, sleepy bags.
The very image of the tragic hero.
A tragic hero at the lowest point of the story.
Yes. And
he comes in, and I truly do love Marianne, and I was just scared, and losing her made me miserable.
I don't want her on death's door. And we discover that the letter that was written to Marianne in London that caused her so much distress was actually penned by his wife.
Yes.
Miss Grey.
Miss Grey wrote the letter.
Yes.
And the way he talks about Miss Grey and the way he talks about Miss Williams, Eliza.
Yes.
He
has no regard for either one of them.
He doesn't give a shit about either of them.
No.
And Eleanor
reprimands him for such action.
She is pissed. And
she should be.
And she sends him away.
She should.
And whenever Marianne starts to recover, basically Eleanor tells her that. She's like, Willoughby showed up, he said he loved you, and he talked about his own wife and the girl that he seduced and impregnated like they were nothing. He's a terrible person. Like, basically, Eleanor goes off. It's beautiful because most of the time Eleanor keeps her mouth shut.
Eleanor is quite reserved, but, like, I believe there is, like, a quote that floats around, and it's like, do not make calm people angry to the point where they lose it. Because
don't
the calmest people hold the worst fire. Or
the deepest,
like that.
Yeah. And so she basically goes off. She's like, Willoughby is immoral, he's erratic, he's unreliable.
He's not an honorable man.
He's not an honorable man, and it was foolish of you to ever engage with him. And Marianne, after her illness, is actually willing to listen.
Yes, because Marianne also, up until this point, believed that you get one love your entire life, and that's it.
And so Marianne realizes
she doesn't think there is a second love.
So Marianne realizes she wouldn't have ever been happy with him, and she wants to be more like Eleanor and be moderate and sensible.
And then here comes Colonel Brandon with Mrs. Dashwood in the carriage to rescue Marianne.
Which is interesting because Marianne doesn't immediately go, "Oh my God, the love of my life." She's like, "Wow, that was a very heartfelt gesture.
Sweet. Thank you so much."
And that's pretty much the end of it there.
And Mrs. Dashwood immediately goes, "Colonel Brandon is in love with Marianne." And everyone's like, "Well, doy."
Well, the thing that's interesting to me about the end of this novel, because Colonel Brandon shows up, this grand romantic gesture, brings her mother when she's on death's door, and Marianne's response is very measured and sensible. That's a very heartful thing. I really appreciate that you did that for me.
She's learning some sense.
And then she slowly falls in love with him over the course of several months.
To quote
Meanwhile, Eleanor, who has at this point been so sensible, suddenly Edward shows up on the door and is like, "Lucy jilted me for my brother Robert whenever she found out I didn't have any money."
You find out that it's like Lucy suddenly had decided that she preferred Robert, and so you hear that Lucy has showed up, and like one of the servants is like, "Oh yeah, her name is Mrs. Ferris now," so they assume Edward is married. And then Edward comes to visit.
Shows up out of the rain
on horseback,
and he's like, "Lucy jilted me for my younger brother, and I never wanted to marry her anyway because Eleanor, I've always been in love with you." And Eleanor breaks down. This is when she finally.
When you've been holding back that level of emotion for that long, of course you're going to break down. Like, I love that scene in the movie that they do, because he shows up, and as soon as Hugh Grant, says that it's like, "Oh, she told me that her affection has transferred to my brother, and I am not married," and then Emma Thompson just starts crying in the corner, and the mom is like, "Ow, ow, ow, ouch!"
It's really, the movie does a really good job of it. Because she just loses that composure.
It shows her it's like she's trying so hard to rein it in, but she can't.
She can't because she's so desperately in love with him. So it's interesting to me that at the beginning of the book, Marianne was wild and, just like romantic, and Eleanor was so sensible, and they both were telling the other that they needed to be more like each other.
Moderation.
And then at the end of the book, Eleanor's the one who has the torrid romantic moment, and Marianne's the one who slowly and quietly grows to love someone.
I fell in love the way you fall asleep slowly and then all at once.
And so they both do learn that there is a certain value in both sense and sensibility. You have to have a little bit of both in order to make it work.
Yes, and I like at the end of the book that it's like the only thing that Willoughby lived and dreaded was the news of Marianne's wedding day. And she marries Colonel Brandon, who he is like, "Oh, he's my arch enemy." But it takes 2 years for her to marry Colonel Brandon. Yeah. She's 19 when she marries Colonel Brandon.
And he is patient.
He is
kind the entire time.
Super cute.
It's very, very quiet.
And
unlike, I really like Pride and Prejudice. And Darcy walking across the moors in the fog to confront Elizabeth after his patroness, his aunt, has been there the night before. It's a very big romantic gesture, and nightly dancing with Harriet.
Nothing is a bigger romantic gesture than forcing a piece of shit man to marry your sister so your reputation won't be ruined.
But there's something to be said for Colonel Brandon's just quiet,
his patience,
and romantic constancy.
Yes.
For Marianne.
So sweet.
It's very calm. Everyone wants this whirlwind romance, but at the end of the day, what you really want is someone who is constantly.
And see, I was never one of those girls that it's like, I wanted a whirlwind romance when I was 13 or 14. And then I got 15 or 16. I'm like, I don't want a whirlwind romance. I want a man who will stand by me no matter what. I want that constance. Yes. And I found it in Paul.
So, would you think
I'm sorry, our anniversary is this week, so I'm really kind of
okay.
All over again.
Would you say that you're more of a Marianne or an Eleanor?
I'm more of an Eleanor.
Yeah?
I'm definitely more of an Eleanor. I will deal with other people's problems and push mine back to the back burner and not deal with them. Mm-hmm. What would you say? You are more Eleanor or Marianne?
I would probably say Eleanor as well. Not because I don't want something big and dramatic or feel emotions strongly, but just because I'm not.
Well, you're not a big romantic.
I mean, that's not necessarily true. It's more like I just don't feel comfortable expressing.
Yeah.
That in a dramatic way, the way Marianne does. Like Marianne would write you a completely sincere poem about the color of your eyes and how they compare to the mossy fall leaves, and she would read it to you in front of other people.
Not all of us have your propensity for leaves.
Without any kind of shame.
Yes.
That would mortify me.
I'm not going to do that.
That would mortify me.
No, I'm not going to do that. I don't want, like, I don't want to let on things that I'm feeling until I know somebody returns them.
Yeah. Eleanor is a piner.
She is. She's a piner.
And I think that is #relatable. I think every one of us
Everyone has pined over someone. Yeah.
So even though...
Who have you pined over? Please say Karina.
Yeah.
Because don't lie.
Oh, God. Yeah, that was a pining situation. She was seeing someone else for a year, and we were roommates. Time that person was at our apartment all the time. And
So you were Colonel Brandon in that situation.
And I was miserable, and I was very quiet about it. I didn't even tell any of our other friends that I disliked the person she was dating because I assumed it was just me being jealous, and so I didn't say anything. And then I found out later that everyone thought that person.
All of us had a distaste for him.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of who I pined over. Because there was this boy in my high school. My mom calls him word turd now, but that's a different story. But there was this boy in my high school, and he was in theater with me, and I was dating another guy at the time. But he was so kind to me, and he was so generous, and I really, really liked him. And I'm like, I shouldn't, and I can't, because I'm in a relationship with this other guy. And, but the other guy was just
not very nice.
He was emotionally manipulative. I didn't really like that. So when someone gave me actual genuine care and support, I'm like, what is this? What are you talking about? And but we ended up dating eventually, and then it didn't work out, which is fine because now I have my husband.
It's interesting to pine for somebody and then get them.
Yeah,
that had never happened to me before. Well, it happened with Jenna and it happened with Karina. But the other people I had pined for, there was a boy once that was not super far from me in age, but older enough that it was probably not entirely appropriate.
Yeah.
And was in a position where they basically were a supervisor to me.
Oh, okay.
And so
that was never going to happen.
But that person was flirtatious with me and spent time alone with me in a way that probably was not appropriate, and I was a teenager, and so I pined hard for several years. Yeah. And did not get it, which is how you expect pining to end. So that was kind of my experience before, and then with the whole thing with Karina, and it was I didn't know what to do with it. I was just it's kind of like Eleanor. It's you just get really emotional because you're am I actually going to get what I want? Yeah.
You're I've wanted this for so long.
But I think needless to say, even though neither of us is as effusive as Marianne, we are both equally as romantic, or at least enjoy the romanticism.
There's nothing wrong with wanting some romance in your life.
Yeah. I like Sense and Sensibility. It's not my favorite Jane Austen, but I do really like it.
I enjoy it quite a bit.
How many bottles did you give it?
I'd probably give it a solid 2.5.
2.5? 2.5?
I might do a 2.75.
Average.
Yeah, it's average. I mean, it's not my favorite Jane Austen. I adore Colonel Brandon, but there is a lot of exposition.
There is a lot of exposition.
There's a lot of exposition for this.
It's Mrs. Jennings is this person, and her daughter is Charlotte, and Charlotte invited them over. But that's just kind of the society of the day.
That is the society of the day.
People didn't, especially women, they didn't have jobs, and so they would travel and visit people
and they would
stay with them and gossip.
Yeah.
Jane Austen novels, we're sitting here talking about it, it basically just sounds like we're talking shit about people we know, because that's what Jane Austen's novels are.
Yeah,
to a certain
but
extent.
like I remember reading Emma the first time. I didn't read Emma for the first time
I
until
feel
I was
like
in college,
Emma-
and then like the big twist at the end happened, and I remember sitting on my futon in my apartment going, and that didn't happen with this novel.
I think Emma and Pride and Prejudice both have a lot more social commentary.
Yes, they do.
There's social commentary in all of Jane Austen's novels.
I mean, I like this book a lot,
but
it's not my favorite.
Hang on a second, I want to see something. Yeah, I think that.
But I do have wonderful memories of like, my brother was in the marching band in college, and so like when I was in high school, my mom and I would go to the clubhouse of his apartment, and we would sit because we had to be there so many hours early to see my brother before the band had to go to the game. And so like I have memories of watching this movie in the clubhouse to the apartment complex he was living in, and it's pouring outside. It's pouring rain. And so my mom and I are like huddled on the couch next to each other with my portable DVD player that she bought me for Christmas, and we're watching Sense and Sensibility huddled together on the couch eating bagels that we bought from Panera. And my dad is sitting in the corner pouting because he's like, I want to watch something with explosions, and I'm like, We're watching Sense and Sensibility.
So I looked it up. Sense and Sensibility. She has other stuff, but her first like real solid full length novel is Sense and Sensibility. Published.
So she's still trying to find her footing.
She's finding her voice. She's focused more on the romantic aspect, the heartbreak, and the love story than she is on the social commentary. Then Pride and Prejudice comes next, Mansfield Park, and then Emma. So
Mansfield Park has a lot of social commentary.
You can see that she goes from just writing. Well, I mean, even Sense and Sensibility is not just a romance novel.
No,
but the social commentary is much more minimal than it is in, say, Emma.
Yes.
And you can see that growth in her work. So I think for the same reason, I would give it maybe 3 stars.
3 stars? So it's still like 2.666666 repeating or something like that. It's a high rating.
It's not bad.
No, it's not bad. I mean, especially for us.
It's not 5 stars. Have we given anything?
I don't think we've given anything more than 4 stars.
I don't think I give 5 stars.
You don't. I've never given a 5 star.
I'm a snooty bitch. I have opinions. But that said, I would definitely recommend Sense and Sensibility to anyone who's looking for romance.
Oh, most definitely, for sure.
So that's that one. That's the romance for the week. We went from the scary books to the romance books, but don't worry.
Well, the next one's pretty scary.
We'll jump back to scary next time.
We'll jump back to scary next week.
So tune in for that
next 2 weeks,
and we will see you then.
Bye.
Ciao. Thank you for listening to our podcast. For more information, visit us at litliteraturepodcast.com or check out our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages. And remember, too much work and no vacation deserves at least a small libation.
Cheers!